He is the Ford Frick Award winner this year. Well-deserved. Still flying, of course, the voice of NFL football on NBC. And he says hello. Al, it's been a while. Nice to chat again. How are you today, pal? Okay?
Dog, I'm doing very well and very excited to win this award. And, to not have done a game for 25 years. That was great, by the way. I had totally forgotten what I'd said at the end of the last game that I would wind up doing. The irony of that game was that we had won a coin flip, ABC, with NBC. So the seventh game of the World Series was going to be ours. But thanks to Dave Justice's home run and Tom Glavine's shutout in Game 6 in Atlanta, that was it. Never got to do that Game 7.
I did know that. Casas did the Game 6. So we got a lot to do here. Let's first start to move to L.A. You had a mom who used to take you to the racetrack. Your father, I believe, was an agent. So you had a lot of Hollywood, theatrics, celebrity, sports. You had that in your blood from an early age. Let's discuss that for a sec. Go ahead.
But before that, Dog, don't forget, I grew up in Brooklyn. And we lived in a one-bedroom apartment on Ocean Avenue. And we lived within walking distance of Ebbets Field. So my father was a big sports fan, and my father walked me over to Ebbets Field. I was probably 6 years old. The first thing I remember in life is walking into Ebbets Field and just being enamored with it. I mean, just the grass was so green. As Vin Scully always said, the Dodger uniforms, wedding cake white, the signage on the outfield. And I remember thinking to myself, I want to be here every day. This is the greatest place on earth. And that was the foundation for my love for sports, my love for baseball. And the Dog, when I was in the fourth grade at PS 139 in Brooklyn, because of overcrowding, we had split sessions. So I would go from 8 to 12. And in those years, the Dodgers played a lot of weekday games. I mean, night baseball was around, but they weren't playing that many games at night. And one of the fathers would come by the school, pick up about 5 or 6 of us, walk us over to Ebbets Field, and we would go to a Dodger game on like a Thursday afternoon. So I think when I was maybe 10 years old or 11 years old, I went to 30 to 40 games a season. So that's how I grew up. And then we moved out to Los Angeles. And then we moved to LA the same year that the Dodgers did. So I never missed a beat. One of the great thrills for me, of course, was, getting a call yesterday from Vin Scully, who's become a great friend through the years. But Vinny is a guy, from the age of 6, I've been listening to Vinny. And I listened to Vinny up until, he retired 3 or 4 years ago. And pretty much modeled my my career in a sense, and certainly the way I began to announce baseball off Vinny's style. And you couldn't have had a better model. And what a great thrill for me to, to hear from Vinny yesterday.
How about that? All right, L.A. Coliseum, 59. Did you go to those Dodger World Series games against the White Sox or no?
Of course, but I went to Game 3, and then I did not. I went to 3 and 4, did not go to 5 because it was a weekday game. I think it was that was a Monday, and then they went back to Chicago. But I went to that. I went to the playoffs where they beat Milwaukee, and I also don't forget that was the year that Roy Campanella, who'd been paralyzed in an auto accident before the Dodgers moved to L.A., they had Roy Campanella night at the Coliseum in May of '59. The crowd was 93,103. I was there that night, and it was phenomenal because, Vinny had everybody light a candle. They turned the lights down, and everybody could hear, Vinny on the radio. Everybody had a transistor in those years. And they lighted a candle for Roy Campanella as he came to home plate. Phenomenal. The Yankees in town. First time not the first time I saw Mickey Mantle in person because I grew up in New York, but the first time that, Mickey Mantle had appeared on the West Coast.
Unbelievable. I've known some of these. You've always told me these great stories. I didn't know you were at that game. That is interesting. I do know that you started your broadcasting career in Hawaii. If you go look at YouTube video, you'll see an episode that Mr. Michaels was on with Hawaii 5-0, which is fascinating, with Jack Lord, Steve McGarrett. But I know that you started your career with the Hawaiian Islanders, and when you took the Reds job, you hated to leave Hawaii. Tell them that story for a sec, Al. That's fascinating. Go ahead.
Well, here I am in Hawaii. I'm doing minor league baseball, but of course I had these grand designs to someday be in the majors. But we loved Hawaii so much. Our first child was born there. I was there for 3 years. Chuck Tanner was the manager. It was fantastic. But, when the big leagues come calling, and the Reds did, and I went back to Cincinnati, and they'd already heard my audition tape, and I know I'm going to get the job. And it's so funny. I was back there in November, and there were two dominant colors at that point when you looked out the hotel window, gray and brown, because, winter was coming. It was 38 degrees. So I went down to the Central Trust Tower where the Reds offices were. Bob Howsam and Dick Wagner were running the team. I get offered the job. I'm going to have dinner with him that night. I want to go back and call my wife. And I'm walking back to the hotel, and there's a travel agency in the window of a hotel right on the corner across the street from my hotel. And I'm looking into the window, and there's a big poster of Hawaii. And not only a poster of Hawaii, it's of Diamond Head. And I can see my apartment. My apartment is actually in this poster.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, wait a second. Wait a second. I'm leaving that. I'm coming here. But of course, I had to take that job, and the rest is history, of course, because 3 phenomenal years there. Then, of course, and I've said this many times, and the truth be told, I go to your favorite team, the Giants, after 3 years in Cincinnati, only because they tripled my salary. I'm leaving a big red machine. Could have done 2 more World Series in 75 and 76. Go to do the Giants, a moribund franchise, but that worked out fine. Led to ABC. And give the Reds a lot of credit. I was there for 3 years, and then they found a guy who was there for the next 44, who's also in the Hall of Fame, Marty Brennaman.
100%. Yeah, the great call of that Al, of course, the ball that Bench hit off Justy at the Game 5 of the 1972 NLCS. That's the last game, by the way, that Clemente ever called. Matter of fact, Al's call, Clemente back to the wall, she's gone. That's the last time we ever heard Clemente being broadcast anywhere as far as baseball is concerned. Justy's homer with Bench out to right field. Now, the break you got, though, Al, you got on a good team right away. And that's a huge team. That's a franchise-altering team. You're in the World Series. I'm sure you did a couple of those games in 72 with the home team announcer and stuff with the A's. And that's a great springboard for you. If you're going to go join in the big leagues, like Enberg did with UCLA and go on a team that's pretty good. And that's what you did there in the early 70s. How about that for a sec? Let me hear.
Better than pretty good. I mean, Dog, when you think about it, I had mentors along the way. When I'm at Arizona State as a kid and I'm announcing games on college, and there's a Kurt Gowdy with me in the World Series in 72. That's when you supplemented Gowdy and Kubek with the team announcers. So not only the Reds winning the pennant, and I'm excited for the Reds, I'm excited for myself when Bob Moose throws that wild pitch and the Reds win the pennant. But I go back to Arizona State. Bobby Winkles was the coach. We had Sal Bando, Reggie Jackson, and Rick Monday as some of the players on that team. And I learned a lot from Winkles, who would go on to manage 3 different teams. I go to Hawaii. Chuck Tanner's our manager for 2 of the 3 years. Learned so much from Chuck. And then you go to Cincinnati. And I had to do a pregame show every day with Sparky Anderson. So I had Sparky alone for at least 10 minutes a day. But oftentimes would turn into maybe 20 or 30. I would just sit in the office with him, talking baseball. Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, Tony Perez, you name it. I mean, that's how you get your PhD in baseball. So the time I'm 27, 28 years old, man, I tell you, I've studied under the greatest. And, what a beginning. And you think back now, you sort of realize it at the time, but I go back now and I go, wow, that is amazing. How did I wind up in all of these places? And so I owe a lot to, the people that I was with during those years. They were great years.
I could ask you about Cosell, but we'll be here for an hour. I do remember the one great line you had. It may have been during a football game where he was on a cover of Sports Illustrated, and Al Michaels said, well, now that Howard's back in a booth, after he went to every newsstand in a certain town to buy every Sports Illustrated, because he was on the cover. Remember that issue that he was on the cover of SI back in the 80s there, Al? I'm sure you remember that, right? Yes, 100%.
Well, not only that, but it didn't even have his name on the cover, as I recall. It just said the one and only. That's all it had to say. And I think he had the picture of him with a cigar and the whole thing. He, I did a lot of games with Cosell in those ABC years, but my favorite story involves another guy who's in the broadcasting wing of the Hall of Fame, the great Bob Uecker, one of the funniest men in the history of the world. And Yuki and I are doing a game with Cosell. I think it's in Houston. And Howard would always put baseball down as a very simple game. They make it so complicated, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's late in the game, and Howard's discussing why I think the Reds or the Astros, whoever was playing that night, they should bunt. And Uecker and I are looking at each other going, no, come on. You don't bunt in this situation, but we don't want to embarrass him on the air. So Euchre says, Howard, I think, in this particular situation, ABC, XYZ, this is probably why you might not want to bunt. And now Cosell's going to chide him back. And Howard says, okay, Yuki, you don't have to be so truculent. You do know what truculent means, don't you? And without hesitating, Euchre says, Howard, of course, if you had a truck and I borrowed it, it would be a truculent. I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Honey,
genius.
Top of his head.
Genius.
Lot of great calls. The one, and it's the best baseball game. That and the '78 Yankee Red Sox game is the two best baseball games that I've ever seen. But Game 5 with the Angels and the Red Sox in Anaheim with your wonderful call with Henderson's home run, a long way from Seattle. I mean, that's one of the great calls. I mean, it's not Miracle on Ice. Don't get me wrong. Do you believe in miracles? But that's one of the great calls that you ever uttered in a Major League Baseball game. How about that for a sec? Go ahead.
Mad Dog, that's the best game I've ever seen. That was so phenomenal. I mean, the Angels have a 5-2 lead going to the ninth. The cops are ringing the outfield wall, and they're in foul territory, making sure the fans don't come out on the field. The Angels are going to win their first ever pennant. Gene Autry has owned the team since the outset. And then you've got Don Baylor hitting a 2-run homer to make it 5-4. Henderson hits that home run, a dramatic, unbelievable home run with 2 strikes after he barely tipped the pitch before. But what people forget about in that game is that in the bottom of the 9th inning, the Angels tie the game. They have the bases loaded and 1 out. All you need is a fly ball to medium deep center field. And instead, you've got Doug DeCinces and Bobby Grich coming up, 2 great hitters, with a little the first guy hits a shallow fly to right to Dwight Evans, so you can't tag and score. Next guy hits a little soft liner back to the pitcher. We go to the 10th inning. And in the 10th, the other thing it's amazing is that the Angels, of course, had Gary Pettis, very fast, but pretty much a slap hitter, a singles hitter. Doesn't hit very many home runs, obviously. And he's a switch hitter. And Gary Pettis, with Jerry Narron running at first base, the count goes to 3-2, 2 out, hits a drive to deep left field, and Jim Rice makes the catch against the wall and has to look into his glove to make sure he caught it. So that sends the game to the 11th inning, where the Red Sox wind up winning the game on a sacrifice fly by Dave Henderson. Go back to Fenway. They win game 6 and 7. And I think that night, I think the longest flight that I know of is San Francisco to Hong Kong, 14 hours. I'll tell you one that's going to be longer, the Angels charter home to Los Angeles. So that was that game. That game was totally off the charts. My favorite baseball game ever.
Well, last thing, Al, it's funny. You were you've made your mark in all the sports. You haven't done a baseball game in a long time, and I'm glad you win this award so people realize how great you were at it. But you have to miss it, right? I mean, I know you like to sort of hint baseball when you're doing some of these Sunday night games. The Dodger game is over, now you can watch us, those kinds of things. But you probably, that's probably, the way this works with TV contracts. If you're working for the network and they have the rights, that's when you really, you hit the home run. And you haven't been in that situation in a while. It's got to be a little disappointing. How much do you miss not calling a ball game in the last 25 years?
Well, Dog, I'll tell you, when you go back to when we lost the rights to cover baseball when I was at ABC, it was very dispiriting. And, I really wanted to continue on. I had done it for so many years, loved it, built my career around it. And fortunately, I had Monday Night Football in those years and a bunch of other assignments that kind of got me over the hump. I don't have many regrets in my career. And I mean, I've had a wonderful run. I've been in some amazing places at the right time. I mean, no real regrets. But I guess if I have one small one, it's that I wasn't able to do baseball all these years because I was not at the place that had the rights. So I fell away from it involuntarily. It's been a long time. I think, that Atlanta-Cleveland game 5 that's the last game I'm going to do because it would just be too hard to jump back in the fray right now. It's so different. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Have Earl Hershiser still pitching? I mean, I'm still kind of living back in the in the 80s and 90s. So I've fallen away from it a bit. I still enjoy watching it, but I think those days are over. But the memories are fantastic. And as I say, that was the foundation of my career.
Yeah, it really was, Al. You've been one of the all-time greats. You deserve this award. Well done. Keep up the good work. We'll see you. You don't have to go to Buffalo. You get a little break there. And we'll see you at MetLife when you freeze the Sunday before Christmas. Knock 'em dead with the Browns. Always a pleasure, pal. Nice to have you with us.
Come on up. Hey, come on up to Cooperstown. You, me, Costas, and the whole gang. We'll have a lot of fun.
That's not a bad idea. That is a good one, and you deserve that. Well done, Al. Enjoy the holidays.